so we don't forget that there was a large Hispanic community that voted for President Trump. I would like to believe that those guys are law-abiding citizens and that they are citizens in the first place, or they have some sort of legal status. So nonetheless, let's jump right in with Gavin Newsom.
Raids in and around Los Angeles. Those raids continue as I speak. California is no stranger to immigration enforcement, but instead of focusing on undocumented immigrants with serious criminal records and people with final deportation orders, a strategy both parties have long supported, this administration is pushing mass deportations, indiscriminately targeting hardworking immigrant families, regardless of their roots or risk. Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets.
All right. Now, he said commandeer. That's almost like acquiring or stealing. But again, he's not given the legal ramification, which I'm going to break down for you guys. Because again, Donald Trump said that Gavin Newsom is a nice guy, but he's grossly incompetent. Now, of course, I'm taking that with a large grain of salt when it comes from the president himself, because some things I know you guys support him on, and other things you're like, probably not the best choice of words. I'm not going to let the cat out the bag. And here is the mayor of LA speaking on this, no other than Karen Bass.
Declared a local emergency and issued a curfew for downtown Los Angeles to stop the vandalism, to stop the looting. Many businesses have now been affected by or vandalized. Last night, there were 23 businesses that were looted. And I think that if you drive through downtown LA, the graffiti is everywhere.
Well, at first, Karen Bass was behind these protests, so to speak. She was behind these protests, or I don't want to get into conjecture. She was against mass deportation. And in some regards, some people may elude that she is in support of anti-ICE protests if you are against legal mass deportation. Now, there is an element of due process that needs to be speak upon, but I've spoke about that many times before. But if you are illegally in someone's country, are you still in privy to due process? Is that a constitutional right that's afforded to people who are legally in the country? Or is that some sort of state law that most Americans don't know, because not all Americans live in California?
And has caused significant damages to businesses and a number of properties. So my message to you is, if you do not live or work in downtown LA, avoid the area.
She was stating how all of these businesses has been vandalized and looted and destroyed. Remember during the Black Lives Matter movement? Okay, again, separating the organization that was a fraud, that those people had an LGBTQ agenda, as well as accumulating all the millions of dollars that Black people and other people, white people, Hispanic people, were donating to support the Black Lives Matter movement. So they made an organization out of it, and they squandered away millions of dollars. But they were stating how Black folk, which they didn't really have any on camera, that were vandalizing, destroying all these buildings. Come to find out later that majority of the buildings being destroyed and vandalized by a group called Antifa, which are basically professional agitators. So again, now they're calling out and they're letting the American people know that, yeah, LA is being destroyed. So I think these things are very imperative too, because again, Mayor Karen Bass declared a local emergency and instituted a nightly curfew in a 1 square mile section of downtown LA in response to 5 nights of escalating protests, vandalism, and looting tied to federal immigration raids. Now, some people are basically stating this is martial law. I want you guys to think about it. So they impose a curfew. That's an indicator of martial law. And they have federalized National Guard troops on ground with 700 active duty Marines, which is a battalion out of 29 Palms. And I believe that the battalion is 2-7. But nonetheless, isn't these some of the hallmarks? Isn't it some of the indicators of martial law when you impose certain things and you have certain personnel on ground? Now, LAPD officials reported mass arrests in downtown's curfew zone with over 300 arrests in the last 2 days. Now, federal troops, including 700 Marines and 4,000 National Guards, have been staging in the area to protect federal buildings though the lack arrest power. I've showed visual graphics here. Let me and this again giving shout out to Nick Shirley, who was on ground zero of these protests here. And again, there's different elements. It's not just a protest. It's not just looting. It's not just rioting. It's a combination of them all. And this is the same sort of segment I did on January 6th. Not every person that stood on the Capitol grounds was a rioter. Not every person that stood on the ground of January 6th was an insurrectionist, because there were people who were peacefully protesting, meaning standing their ground, yelling and screaming, giving their heart's content. But then there was others who were scaling the Capitol walls, who intruded and invaded and trespassed within the Capitol. Those are those who did grotesque things within the Capitol. These are the people who are rioting, looting, and insurrection. So we can't label one group because they're standing for what they believe in, so to speak, how illegal it may be, that all of these people are bad people or they're insurrections. I would never believe that. But I do want to show you guys some graphics here, because I know a lot of this have not been shown by certain media outlets.
Coming in on all angles right now.
Now, my question is, they're totally destroying this vehicle. Don't forget, there's police personnel, there's law enforcement inside of that truck, whether it be local LAPD or ICE agents. But nonetheless, is this an attack of aggression? Would they be in their lawful capacity if they open fire with live rounds? Okay, I want to keep it very simple. Okay, so they got other I won't say non-lethal. They have lethal deterrents that deem themselves to be non-lethal, but things can occur. They have CS gas, also known as tear gas. They have billy clubs. They have pepper spray. They have tasers. They have rubber bullets. They have all these things that don't really pose an immediate danger to most people, nonetheless. But here's the kicker. If someone is throwing bricks and rocks and also the projectiles at your vehicle, are you within your legal right to protect yourself and your property by lethal means? That's the only question I have. I digress. Title 10 authority allows the federal government to federalize a state national guard. Again, Title 10 authority allows the federal government to federalize a state national guard, placing it under full federal control during national emergencies, rebellion, or invasion. A lot of people are deeming this an invasion because the people who are on our land are illegally in the country. So they're stating that this is an invasion. This can also look as a rebellion of keeping people illegally in the country. So again, you have all these legal ramifications. Now, I haven't forgotten, I'm still going to look for Title 10 for you guys, but I'm popping up the 10th Amendment so you can read that as well, because this is going to be very prevalent to the legal authority that the president may have. Now, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I know a lot of legal jargon that most people will not understand unless you have a law degree, which majority of Americans do not. So again, us understanding the legal ramification, the legal jurisdiction, etc., and not being tied to our emotions is very, very important. Okay. Now, however, federal law also requires that the orders be issued through the governor. Federal law also requires that the orders be issued through the governor. Trump bypassed Governor Newsom, making it the first unilateral federalization in decades. It's not that it's never happened before, because it has, but it hasn't happened in a very long time. Now, California has filed an emergency lawsuit calling the move illegal. They're saying that this move is illegal, a violation of the 10th Amendment, and an unprecedented power grab. And as I stated before, there's a lot of legal scholars highlight the thin line between merely protecting the federal personnel and actively involving troops and law enforcement, which is normally prohibited by the Posse Comitatus Act. So let's talk about the Posse Comitatus Act. Okay. Now, for a lot of you legal scholars out there, I'm just popping up certain amendments for you guys, but we're going to break down the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, it's stated here that this act of 1878, which removed the military from regular civil law enforcement, was enacted in response to the abuses resulting from the extensive use of the Army in civil law enforcement during the Civil War and the Reconstruction. The act allows legislative exemptions. Then it goes into the abstract. I'll let you guys read that for your viewing pleasure. But nonetheless, this is what a lot of legal scholars stated, that this is normally prohibited by the Posse Comitatus Act of him invoking Title 10. Now, Trump, acting in his capacity as commander-in-chief, authorized active duty forces to protect federal buildings without invoking the Insurrection Act. So again, you have the Posse Comitatus Act, you have Title 10, you have the 10th Amendment, and now we're referring to the Insurrection Act, which is also important. Let me give you guys a little breakdown of that. Now, the Insurrection Act authorizes the president to deploy military forces inside the United States to suppress rebellion or domestic violence, or to enforce the law in certain situations. The statute implements Congress' authority under the Constitution to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. President Trump on many occasions has stated that this is an insurrection. Many people have stated that this is an invasion because people are foreign and illegally on the land. It is the primary exception. Again, it is the primary exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, under which federal military forces are generally barred from participating in civilian law enforcement activities. So again, is this a one-all where it kind of just exempt everything else, and then you insert the Insurrection Act and gives the president legal authority? Although it is often referred to as the Insurrection Act of 1807, the law is actually an amalgamation of different statutes enacted by Congress between 1792 and 1871. Now, today, these provisions occupy these sections through this, but in Title 10 of the United States Code. Now, it says, what does invoking the Insurrection Act allow the president and military to do? Under normal circumstances, the Posse Comitatus Act forbids the U.S. military, including federal armed forces and National Guard troops who have been called into federal service, from taking part in civilian law enforcement. Now, this prohibition reflects as American traditions that views military interference in civilian government as being inherently dangerous to liberty. Now, I wanted to point this out as well. Invoking the Insurrection Act temporarily suspends the Posse Comitatus rule and allows the president to deploy the military to assist civilian authorities with law enforcement that might involve soldiers doing anything from enforcing a federal court order to suppressing an uprising against the government. Of course, not every domestic use of the military involves law enforcement activity. Other laws, such as the Stanford Act, allow the military to be used to respond to national disasters, public health crisis, and other similar events without waiving the restrictions of the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, the key point here is that by invoking, which he has not done yet, by the way, he has not done this yet, but by invoking the Insurrection Act, it suspends the Posse Comitatus rule. But the key component in this, fam, is about that he deployed those troops to protect federal buildings, okay? Federal buildings. Now, as I stated before, the Insurrection Act will be required for law enforcement duties, something that Trump, again, hinted at invoking later. Now, the last domestic active duty deployment involving federalizing troops under NORTHCOM Task Force 51, where Marines lacked clear rules of engagement, raising concerns about inadvertent use of force, using untrained troops, untrained troops for crowd controls can escalate tensions. And this is what a lot of the legal experts are stating. Now, what's important here is that the Army, as well as other armed forces, started to train active military troops and crowd control for people who are rioting, looting, and this is for whether it be international or domestic altogether. So I think that's a large part of what a lot of these legal experts are missing, that they're now being trained for crowd control for domestic use. Now, as I was saying, that the role of the Insurrection Act, which is very important, because Trump has not yet invoked it yet, which will legally permit active duty troops to perform law enforcement activities, overriding the posse comitatus limits. Now, his public rhetoric, however, mentioning the potential use of this law in arresting Governor Newsom, this really signals readiness for more forceful actions, because ICE has not ramped or decreased their ICE raids. They ramp up their ICE raids. If we look at the scope of the raids, federal sweeps that has targeted over 3,000 individuals per day under President Trump's immigration agenda. Now, these arrests, they occur at warehouses, day labor sites, public businesses, all of these, capturing some individual with court dates or permanent resident status. Now, some of the legal challenges to these raids, I think, needs to be very public, because critics call the sweeps sweeping up innocent people, and they point to the Fourth Amendment concerns as ICE executes arrests in public spaces without individualized suspicion. And ICE operates within federal immigration law. That's important to know. Unless a court finds constitutional violations, that the operations remain legally permissible. As I stated before, the judge rejected Newsom's emergency request to limit Trump's LA troop deployment. They say he's within his legal rights. This is still permissible. Now, protests, if you guys are aware, actually began on June 6th with clashes near federal buildings, use of less lethal force, and a growing federal and state law enforcement presence. Now, as of today, hundreds have been arrested, several injured, with dozens of confrontations on the streets and freeway of LA. Now, I know a lot of people are asking, is this constitutional? Are ICE raids unconstitutional? And we're looking at all of these statutes. I popped up the Second Amendment because that has to do with the National Guard. It says here that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. Did you guys know the only way that the British colonizers, when we're talking about, what was the name of the war? The Revolutionary War, I believe. The only reason why we gained our independence from the British, July 4th, 1776, is because of militias. It's because of homeowners, farmers, and everyone else joined arms throughout the United States of America, joined arms, and they formed militias, which is now known as the National Guard. But under certain circumstances, the president can federalize National Guard. So he can then take control of the militia and then use that militia against the people. Because that's what people were saying. Oh, that's why we need the right to bear arms, because if the government comes down on us, well, the Insurrection Act. If there's an uprising of any sort, and due to injustice of the people or humanitarian efforts, the president just can go in and use the Insurrection Act to federalize troops. So now you take the power away from these military groups that are state assets to now to be federalized, which increases the personnel of the military tenfold. Because now we have elements, we have echelons, we have battalions and divisions in every state when it comes to the National Guard, and then federalizing them. I think that's very imperative to note, because I don't think people are looking at that implication. Because a lot of these so-called legal experts note that these tactics walk a constitutional tightrope, that are risking civil liberties while technically lawful. Again, while technically lawful. Now, if we look at some of the president's federal actions, whether they're lawful or they are an overstep, okay? Whether they're a lawful or an overstep. Now, the action federalizing California National Guard, he used Title 10. And some of the legal challenges, yes, the governor's office says improper bypass of the state authority because he didn't go through Governor Gavin Newsom. But here's the issue at stake. The 10th Amendment, posse comitatus, and then if he enacts the Insurrection Act, all of that goes away. Here's another action, deploying Marines. The legal underpinnings of that is that he is the commander-in-chief and he has the authority. And some of the legal challenges, yes, active duty troops in domestic settings can fuel the posse comitatus concern, and that these are legal ramifications that the president could possibly overstep. Here are the issues at stake because you have the civil military boundaries and the authorization to use military force. Here's another action, Insurrection Act, that we all kind of gave you guys a breakdown so you can understand where I'm going at with this, that provides full law enforcement powers to the president. But this has yet been invoked. And so you have the issues that the domestic military use falls under the jurisdiction of constitutional civil rights. And then lastly, when you're talking about the ICE raids, because that's the most important thing here, this is the inspiration, motivation, and that which inspired a lot of these protests in LA. And now that these protests are now going to go nationwide, I know you guys have been hearing about that they're taking these protests nationwide. And the legal underpinnings of this is under existing immigration and criminal laws gives ICE the jurisdiction to mass deport people who are legally in the country. And I know the legal challenges, as I already stated in the beginning of the broadcast, due process challenges arise in court, that these people who are being deported do not have legal process. And I know the scapegoat, the civil liberties, the 4th and 14th Amendments. But as we look at this, people who are in a legal status that we've given legal residency to, that legal residency is not expired. People who are on student visas, work visas, they are protected in some regards under constitutional law, and they have the right to go through due process versus people who are simply here illegally. Now, as we look at the broader implication, state versus federal conflict, California's lawsuit represents a broader struggle over sovereignty under the 10th Amendment if the president prevails, because it could set a federal precedent on mobilizing state military assets. Now, the military's neutrality is at risk because you have all these legal scholars that are warning that involving active duty troops risk militarizing domestic unrest, blurring the line between civil and military roles. So there is a sense of suppression of dissent because civil liberties advocates argue deploying troops to suppress protests infringes on First Amendment rights. So these are some of the things that we look about. So here's the verdict, I guess. Right, wrong, or complicated. More times than I usually would say indifferent, but no, right, wrong, or complicated. Because as I gave you guys all Title 10 and Title 22 and the Posse Comitatus Act and the Insurrection Act and the 14th Amendment, the 4th Amendment, the 2nd Amendment, you have all these rights and laws that makes most Americans so darn confused. Here's the legality. Trump's actions rest on Title 10 and executive authority. Not unlawfulness, but Title 10 was arguably misused without the governor's consent. I think I found it. I believe I found it. I think we're getting closer here. Here we go. Title 10 has all this information that's listed for you guys, but this is where I wanted for you guys to see this because I think it's important. Members of the National Guard called into federal service are from the time when they are required to respond to the call subject to the laws and regulations governing the Army or the Air Force, as this case may be, except those applicable only to members of the regular Army or regular Air Force, as the case may be. Again, I know a lot of you people like, what does that actually mean? This is the law that we're talking about, and that's why I try to give you guys a very comprehensive breakdown on Title 10, because this can actually be very convoluted. The United States or any of the Commonwealths or possession is invaded or is in danger of invasion by a foreign nation. Now, there's no nation that's invading America, but there are people from a foreign nation, foreign nations, okay? Not just people in Mexico and Central America, but there was other people out there as well waving their flags. It states that there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. Again, all of this can fall under the authority and jurisdiction of Title 10. The president is unable with the regular force to execute the laws of the United States. The president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers as he considers necessary to repel the invasion, suppress the rebellion, execute those laws. Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, or in the case of the District of Columbia, through the commanding general of the National Guard or the District of Columbia. So that is why people are stating that President Trump has violated Title 10, because he's supposed to go through the state in order to do so. But people saying when you throw in Title 10 as well as Posse Comitatus Act, and he's not invoked the Insurrection Act, he is operating in direct repel of the current laws that we have on the books, which are federal laws, so to speak. Title 10 is a federal jurisdiction law. So again, this could be very complicated, and that's why I stated what I stated, that this can be very, very complicated. Now, the legitimacy of this deploying troops in a civilian setting raises serious civilian military boundary concerns, even if no laws were technically broken. Here's the ethical application, and this gets involved with a lot of people, emotions, morals, and ethics, which is not governed by U.S. law. As I told you guys many times before, U.S. law is neither emotional, ethical, or moral. So here's the ethical implications. We have visible militarization of public protests, damages trust in our government, especially given comparisons to authoritarians and historical overreaches. And I guess this would be my final assessment on this. When it comes to the legal ramifications, actions may technically fit within the federal statutes, but they test constitutional boundaries and the 10th Amendment constraints. Now, the president may have stepped beyond his intended limits, notably by bypassing state authority and floating Posse Comitatus norms. He sets a precedent for domestic military use and potential suppression of dissent. So this is a very, very complex and troubling moment for American federalism, rule of law, and the democratic norms when we look at the law and some of the things that the president has enacted. And I just, again, all of these constitutional titles and codes that we kind of just comb through here, it's very important that we understand the legal ramification that the president and authority that he has by being the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and by invoking and enacting certain titles, certain acts, that the president himself could be on the borderline of breaking the law or on the borderline of enforcing the law. Now, I want to guys show you why a lot of foundational Black Americans have come out against supporting anti-ICE protests, which goes against our immigration laws. Because first and foremost, anytime that Black Americans get in the street, it's for injustice of our people. It's for injustice and racial discriminatory acts against Black people. Not that we're trying to support people illegally in the country, number one, or we're trying to support. It's kind of like if 100 of you guys went out and robbed a bank. And then black people got in the street, let my people go or free these people because they robbed banks. No, again, take your emotions out of it. I know it's hard because we all have emotions. I get it. But if we just look at the law, I've been to over 40 countries. And in those 40 countries, I had to go through their immigration process, meaning I had to go through immigration. I had to go through customs. They had to track me. They took pictures and fingerprints or whatever, bioscans. If you guys ever traveled before, you go through immigration. You don't fly, you don't walk into Mexico. No, you don't do that. That's illegal. Any other country. So why we're allowing it in America? I know why. We have friends, we have family, we have loved ones that are in the country illegally. So that is why we have this emotional attachment, and that we're stating that a lot of the things that the state government and the federal government are doing is illegal. This has nothing to do with the people themselves, but we have to first understand that they're in the country illegally. So you already broke the law. Then a concentration of them have committed violent acts, which makes them violent criminals. So that's strike two. But nonetheless, a lot of these people, either people want to bring in what Obama did in office by signing DACA of separating families and conjoining families. Here's my position on this. I know this is a very strong position. You came inside the country illegally, and then you had children. And according to the Constitution, your children are now U.S. citizens. Even under the jurisdiction of you being illegally in the country, I would like to believe that because you are illegal, your offspring is illegal too. But I digress. I'm not going to elude and try to change the Constitution. So your children are citizens. So it's one of two things. America doesn't want to break up families, but America do have laws. So we're going to deport you. Well, my children are citizens. Okay, well, I mean, your children can stay. Well, you're separating families. So either you're going to take your children and be deported, or you're going to leave your children under family members or friends that are citizens. That's the choice. I don't know why that's so hard. If you want your children with you, then they can go with you as you're being deported, and then you can do reentry under legal means through our immigration. And for some reason, that's very hard for people to decipher and to understand that being the most powerful country in the world and having 11 million people in the country unlawfully, illegally, not just from Mexico, not just from the Central American countries, but from South America, the Caribbean, Africa, different parts of Asia, different parts of Eastern Europe. We have so many illegal immigrants in our country. And don't forget this, not all of them entered through southern the border. Some of them flew in. Not the ones that the government allowed, the Afghanis, the Ukrainians. No, not them. But the people who came over here on H-1B visas, those visas are now expired. Those people who couldn't renew their legal status and stayed afterwards, they're here illegally. Those people on student visa who stayed after the student visa and didn't renew it or get a work visa, they're illegal too. So there are many people in America who are legally here. But if you guys want to take a trip down memory lane, then I'm going to show you why Black Americans are sitting this one out. Okay. I really want to point this out. But before I do that, I want to remind people that a large part of the Hispanic community supported Donald Trump. Can I do that very quickly? I just want to remind people of this.
You loud because I want to Trump. Hear that. I will vote for Donald Trump. I will vote for Donald Trump. Let's go. Latino for Trump. I will vote for Donald Trump.
Now, I want to take a trip down memory lane to remind everyone why Black Americans are taking this stance.
We need to go downtown and protest with the essays.
Go down there and protest?
Yeah, you know, black and brown love. We are allies, blood.
Let me think about that. Right.
Man, LA, dog, if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. LA's racist.
But at the time, Martinez in that recording also referred to the child as a monkey. The councilman in a statement called the comments vile and disgraceful and said that, quote, Martinez attacked her son with horrific racist slurs and talked about her desire to physically harm him.
We don't want to sign to no blacks. Right. Southsiders do want, guess, I don't want to speak on that, but we don't want to sign to no blacks.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
The Mexican gang, they already have their laws.
Yeah.
And you're going to follow their laws.
Yeah.
Like, you can't sleep in a cell with a black guy.
Really?
No, it's against the law.
A Mexican gang member cannot have a black cellie.
No. He has to go to the hole.
So he has to basically fight that guy.
They sabotage black and white people on jobs, get black and white people fired on jobs, and then you will see their cousins, their uncles, their brothers, their sisters, and everybody on the job got fired because they didn't try to get you out of there, and their whole family is there. And don't let one of them get to become a supervisor.
You know what? I'm going to just sit this one out.
For real, folks? Are you sure?
Yeah, I am sure.